Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. Happy week, what is this, 15 of the undergraduate semester. We're just really thrilled to be able to present this colloquium series. This is the kickoff. We have not done this before, so we appreciate more than anything your presence and you being here to share the space with us. But this, the combining of the Interdisciplinary Humanities Majors presenting capstones and the Keck Humanities Fellowship, we have collaborated in the past, but in terms of a colloquium series and in terms of this being a Zoom event, these are definitely new features. So we're really hopeful that we can get a dialogue going between our researchers and that we can all sort of participate in as supporters and faculty mentors and family and friends. So my role, I'm Jesse Mills. I'm in the Ethnic Studies Department. I'm also the Chair of Collaborative Research with the Humanities Center. It's a real honor to welcome you. I'd also like to just provide a brief land acknowledgement that the University of San Diego is in the ancestral unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. So those of us living and working at, around, or near USD, it's really important that we understand that the ground that we stand on and the ground that we sort of live in interdependence with, that we cannot survive without, is in fact unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation, whose leadership is still actively involved in its sovereignty work, as well as the well-being of the Kumeyaay Nation and all of us. So I'm going to just sort of provide my welcome here and then hand it over to Dr. Atri Fukan, who will be facilitating our conversation today. So thank you everyone again for being here. Atri.
Thank you so much, Jesse, and also for giving us a moment to speak about the land acknowledgement. Thank you. So welcome to everyone. I'm delighted to see so many friends and family and also faculty members, advisors. Part of the thing of doing research is having a community which is outside of your academic community to understand how just living a life of the mind, thinking thoughts and loving ideas is supported by our family and peers. And of course, faculty outside of our classrooms. So we really thank you all for the continued support you obviously given to each other to reach this moment. I also want to say this is Professor Mills' last year in this role. So I hope we can all sort of do a Zoom clap for him. He's been amazing. I'll miss you because you won't be there next year. But that will be my last year too. So we're all just ending our terms. I'm the director of the Interdisciplinary Humanities program. And we've been working for the past 3 years to have this humanities research colloquium. It's the first time that we've ever tried to formally recognize how important it is for young scholars to spend a year investing in their mind. They're literally allowed to do anything they want, explore any project they want, and sometimes that's daunting, but they all take on the challenge. And I think, as Professor Malik said, Jesse and I only learn from the students. I know that when I teach them, I'm just a cheerleader because I'm learning so much from them. So I'd like to just sort of turn the floor to the students. We have 2 Keck Fellows today and 2 Interdisciplinary Humanities seniors. The students are going to present one after the other, and then we'll pause for them to ask each other questions, offer feedback, insights, comments, and then sort of have that discussion for a while. And then we'd love to open it up to the floor for others to as well ask questions. You can also ask questions. This is again one of the things about chat, which about Zoom, which is that please use your emoticons for support as they're speaking. And if you have questions as they're speaking, please put it in the chat box. I'll facilitate that as well. Okay, so thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited. As Professor Mills said, we've never done this before, so please, be sympathetic to any kind of awkward moments. Catherine, I think you're going to begin.
Hi, I'm Catherine Lay. I'm an Interdisciplinary Humanities Major with a concentration in history and minors in French and ethnic studies. I'd first like to thank Dr. Foucan for being an amazing advisor who's pushed me to explore my passions and strive for excellence in my academic endeavors. Because of Dr. Foucan's openness and support, I've been able to explore a thesis very important to me academically and personally. My thesis is Spirituality, Exploring its Significance in Interdisciplinary Research. I argue that spirituality can be examined outside of a theological lens and present my own definition in which spirituality is understood as a human experience. Before I explain my research so far, I'd like to give some insight into why this research is so important to me and the academic community. Personally, I've always felt a connection and love for spirituality. In my younger years, my spirituality was practiced within the vacuum of the Catholic Church. But as I grew older, I felt a disconnect to the organized practice of religion, yet still yearned to expand my spirituality. In my recent years, I found music, writing, and art a huge part of my spiritual journey, and it is in those moments that I feel my higher self growing. It is in these moments of severe pain, immense happiness, and genuine laughter that I begin to feel connected as a human being and feel a greater purpose in my life. I now realize that the narrative I've been telling myself, that religion and spirituality are to be explored as one, has denied me from reaching my full potential. With my work, I hope to enlighten others that they too can expand and explore their spirituality without feeling confined to the realm of religion. I want to show people that they are practicing spirituality, whether they are conscious of it or not, just by embracing their hobbies and participating in popular culture. Spirituality is complex, but consciousness can change everything. So to get it started, what is spirituality? The first thing I noticed in my research was that, The first thing I noticed in my research was that in my fight to define spirituality outside of a theological lens, I could not do so without outlining the differences between the two. I came to the conclusion that there is a dualism with spirituality and religion. They are two distinct concepts that are interconnected, but are not interchangeable. Definitions of religion follow the theme of institutionalized beliefs or doctrines and devotion to deities or higher powers. On the other hand, definitions of spirituality tend to focus on the importance of the human experience, relationship between mind and body, as well as an understanding of self in relation to the universe. The New Age spirituality movement in the 1960s and 70s solidified in academics this notion of spirituality being highly eclectic, an individual experience, and free from discipline, rule-based thinking. When we break away from rule-based thinking, we can begin to see how spirituality is indistinguishable from the human experience. Spirituality is transhistorical, meaning transcending all historical boundaries. It is eternal. Therefore, spirituality does not begin with the birth of religion, rather the birth of humans and the consciousness of the human experience. But so what? What does it mean? What does it matter that spirituality is rooted in the human experience? What does this mean for us? In the podcast, Spirituality by Stephen Sutcliffe and Bose Hoss, I understood the urgency for spirituality in civilizations. Spirituality holds significance as a cultural category because of the essence of vitalism within it. Vitalism, as in this feeling that there is more to social life than what is addressed in institutionalized religion. Spirituality matters because it is omnipresent in society. It is in TV shows, books, magazines, and even discussions with your friends. And while these actions hold significance in their own individual ways, they are significant to the entire human population because they have this ability to produce that feeling of life, enjoyment, and consciousness. They produce that something other that is so hard to define and which I have come to call spirituality. So with that being said, how are spirituality and music intertwined? In the words of Iris Yobbs, music is a language of spirituality. She reflects this by removing the emphasis from the action of spiritual manifestations and rather concentrates on the on the capacity for humanness within each manifestation. By removing the emphasis from the spiritual manifestations themselves and focusing on the human characteristics that produce spiritual fruits, we can see the variety of ways, disciplines, activities, and practices that engage spirituality. I like to think of it in this way. If you were to look through my playlist on my phone, you would never guess that any of these songs hold spiritual significance to me. But some of these songs have the ability to overwhelm me with emotion and a feeling that I cannot ignore. And while these lyrics are not blatantly spiritual, the process of listening to these songs and reaction that is produced is spiritual, as they help reflect my current inner emotions and feeling towards myself and the outside world. There are two advantages, as Yobbs describes, to understanding spirituality in this way. The first is that it frees spirituality from the domain of religion. And the second is that it permits us to pay closer attention to the human spirit as the source of such manifestations. Again, taking away the attention from the institutions and putting it on the individual. Yobbs, like me, ponders on what this feeling is and what this means for humans universally. She writes that despite continued efforts in philosophical and theoretical debates, that feeling of something more that is so innate to us all has still not been universally defined. While I continue to understand that sensation as a spiritual activation and experience, Yobbs goes as far to mention the soul. She notes that while academia has hesitated to label it as the soul, everyday understanding has not surrendered that idea yet. I'm reluctant to mention the soul in my work for two reasons. One being, I find it too interrelated to religious interpretations of spirituality. And two, like other academics, I found it hard to find a concrete and universal definition that is palatable to all. On the other hand, I appreciate Yobbs' reference of the soul as it highlights something very important: a division between academia and everyday understandings. By defining spirituality as a human experience, I am attempting to mitigate this divide by making spirituality approachable for all humans and specific to their interests. I view myself as a middleman, helping to illuminate the people in simple yet scholarly supported terms, showing them the possibilities for spiritual development outside of religious practices. So then in this section of my research, I focused on spirituality and popular culture. And I decided to use Oprah Winfrey to analyze the relationship between spirituality and popular culture. Oprah is both a spiritual and popular culture icon for many. And I read the paper Oprah Winfrey and Spirituality by Denise Martin, and I was able to learn the Latin origin of spirituality, spiritus, meaning invoking breath, courage, and vigor. I specifically enjoy this definition of spirituality, as I believe it gives credit to the humanness of spirituality, as well as presenting life and breath as a communal journey we can all relate to. As you have heard, my model for understanding spirituality is to understand it as a human experience, unique to humans. Therefore, this definition of invoking breath is important to my work, as I believe spirituality is like breathing. We all practice it as humans. However, when we become conscious of it, we can see the value that it holds. And we begin to recognize the corporality of our lives, and we invest in more by repeatedly practicing this action. In the same way, people routinely watch Oprah or engage with her. They help to understand their individual human experiences while also becoming conscious of the greater collective going through a similar journey. Most importantly, in Martin's paper, I learned that through the 5 aspects of the Winfrey production, Beloved, O Magazine, The Oprah Winfrey Show, Oprah.com, and her philanthropic endeavors, Oprah is able to resonate with individuals while simultaneously relating to the millions. It is through the different outlets of the Oprah franchise that people are able to engage with the human experience and find comfort in it. In her talk show, Oprah has welcomed many people to the stage to share their hardships and offer advice and support in their journey. She's even shared her own spiritual journey outside of her religion and helped normalize attitudes similar to the New Age movements. The fan base of Oprah shows a desire in popular culture to relate to others who are suffering, excited, celebrating, and even hurting. And this is proven in her ratings of her shows, her continued online presence, and her dedicated followers. I should have mentioned this in the beginning, but I'm sure many of you understand that this is a work in progress. And if I had more time, I'd love to go in way more depth about everything I've spoken about. And I'd even love to explore the surrealism movement and its relationship to spirituality and how that reflects the human experience. But before I end, I'd like to leave you with a few things that I've learned from my work. Firstly, I've learned the importance of situating yourself in the research and being aware of dominant narratives. And I've also learned that there's a huge division between academia and everyday life that is in some ways preventing research from being explored. In my research of spirituality, I found that there is a common acceptance and understanding of what it means. However, the depth and significance of it has not been explored thoroughly enough. There is a hesitation in academics to explore the topic of spirituality because it is hard to translate into words. But we need to carry out this research because it is relatable and important to all humans. I also believe it is important to gain knowledge on topics that are applicable to everyday life, and I hope that my research will reflect this. Thank you so much for listening to me. My bibliography.
Thank you, Catherine. That was amazing. I love your conclusions too. After college, academia is not really doing a good job, right?
Yeah, and I know we've talked about it a lot too, and just being able, I wish I had done my preface already so that I could situate myself a bit more in this research, but hopefully many of you will read my work when it's done and you'll be able to understand a bit more about me and where I'm coming from in this journey.
It was beautiful. Thank you.
I too, like Catherine, I'd love to give a little, share a little mini presentation that I prepared for you guys. Thank you so much for listening to me today. My name is Shan Malik, and my academic advisor is Dr. Foucan here. And I just wanted to thank her and everybody else for giving me a platform to attempt to express the complexity of the issue that I wanted to explore in my senior research project. But basically, my project is called The Greater We, a work of identity from an Islamic-American perspective. And I wanted to begin, before everything else, with an image of my main motivations for undertaking this project. Now, Islam in the United States is a very little known community, and it remains widely discriminated against in the US ever since the attacks of 9/11, ever since sort of the war on terror and the beginnings of the war in Iraq. Discrimination has skyrocketed against so many different various groups who were stemming from South Asia, North Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Europe. And this really started making me beg the question, in the United States, we are a culture that's basically defined by cross-cultural contamination. How can it be that a single group is so isolated and targeted for such high levels of discrimination and misunderstanding? And this research project is not just an academic one, but it's actually a spiritual one as well. Because of me coming from an Islamic-American background myself, this issue has profoundly affected both myself, people within my friends and family, and also within my greater group of associates and friends. And basically the two parts of my project is I'm going to explore what are the roots of this Islamophobia in the US? Why does it exist? Why is it here in our cultural, social, and geopolitical sphere? And the second part of my project is a research into the Islamic term, which is ummah. Ummah is an Arabic word that means community. And I want to argue why ummah is a concept that not only is beneficial for Islamic people themselves, but it's one that American culture overall as a greater whole could greatly benefit from when it comes to adopting it to their daily lives. Now, first and foremost, I wanted to begin with one of the main questions which concerns the history and geopolitics of Islamophobia in the US. Why are Muslims misunderstood and alienated in the West? And of course, this is such an increasingly complex issue, But basically, we can narrow it down to a few factors such as historical biases, a lack of understanding of incredibly complex geopolitical issues, whether it comes to neocolonialism, whether it comes to poverty in the third world, whether it comes to long-standing religious issues in poor communities in the Middle East. And also, perhaps this might be the one we are all most familiar with, outstandingly routine inflammatory media depictions that seem to perpetuate the negative images of Islamic culture, both in the United States and abroad throughout the world. And among the three great academics that I dedicated much of my research towards for basically gaining information for my project, they included Frantz Fanon, Malcolm X. Shabazz, and Edward Said. Now, I extracted a lot of information from Frantz Fanon and Edward Said concerning the fact that Islamophobia has very real and tangible and measurable psychological effects upon Islamic Americans, which includes a feeling of dehumanization, alienation, a feeling of othering. Now, it may be hard for someone outside of a community to truly understand these sort of psychological effects, but these are very deeply held feelings of rejection by a minority that wants to be accepted, that wants to integrate themselves into a greater society, but face routine discrimination in a myriad of fields. And Frantz Fanon spoke about this a lot. He was a Martinican intellectual who was born in the early 20th century. And by being a Martinican, he was actually a French citizen. And he was of Afro-Caribbean descent. And him moving to France and studying psychology and studying medicine there sort of exposed him to this great idea of colonialism, which is that there are the rulers, and then there are the ruled, which in turn implies that minority communities and other discriminated groups will always be subjected to routine forms of maybe rejection or cultural rejection, and they will always be subjected to various pressures, environmental pressures, to adhere to certain preconceived expectations of how they should live their lives and such. And the next part of my project concerns how Islamic people are not aliens to the United States. Muslim Americans have been here from the very beginning of the United States, since the very foundation, even though, unfortunately, the bad reputation sort of skyrocketed in the early 21st century. Islamic Americans have been here since the beginning. Islamic Americans served in George Washington's army to fight for independence in the Continental Army. This is a very little known fact. Another very interesting fact is, if you see in the top right of my presentation here, this is a copy of a Quran, which is the sacred book of Islam, which was the personal possession of none other than Thomas Jefferson, the founding father of the United States, you know, the famous man who wrote one of the most inspirational documents that changed not just the history of the United States, but of the world. And other very unknown facts is that even beyond the inception of America, Islam has always been interlinked with the West. They've always been connected with the West, and there's always been a mutually beneficial relationship. It's not just been wars and crusades and religious conflicts. There's the other half of history, which is trade, intermarriage, exchange of ideas. Now, I wanted to show you guys a little bit of this. The very works of the ancient Greeks, such as Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, the very Greek thinkers that we consider the foundation of Western academics and Western science, were in fact preserved by Arabic scholars in Baghdad, in Persia, and in Alexandria, Egypt, and given to the Europeans at the end of the Dark Ages, which helped sort of spark the light of the Renaissance. And this shows that Islam actually had a huge sort of contribution in the regrowth of ideas and scholasticism in the Western world. And did you know that coffee was once forbidden by the Pope as a Muslim drink because coffee came from the Middle East? It was actually the drink vastly popular among the Turks and the Arabs and the Persians, and the cultivation actually came from Yemen, right south of Saudi Arabia. In fact, the word mocha is actually a city in Yemen. The word mocha drink is named after Yemen. So Islamic contributed coffee. The word lemon is from Arabic. The word orange is from Arabic. Alchemy, algebra, algorithm, zenith. These are all Arabic words that have benefited the English language and various European languages. So many terms for science, mathematics, engineering. And this only reinforces the fact that the West and Islam are not enemies, nor are they strangers. They've always blended and learned from each other. And the very last part of my research project concerned the exploration of the idea ummah. Now, ummah loosely translates as community, or it translates as a greater group, a greater tribe. Now, the reason why I argue that this is such not only a beautiful concept for people stemming from that part of the world, but why it can be so beneficial to the United States and the West as well, is because it implies that we can view other people, men, women, everybody in between, we can view everybody as brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, regardless of ethnic background, regardless of socioeconomic background. We can view everybody as being essentially equal. And this term is really influential because in the Middle East and in South Asia and in West Africa, North Africa, and the Horn of Africa, the concept of Ummah is incredibly influential because it is very different from the Western concept of sort of a strict sort of linear progression of nuclear families or very strict adherence to familial definitions such as second cousins, third cousins. This doesn't exist in that part of the world. Ummah basically implies that everybody's not just a cousin, but in fact, everybody's a brother, everybody's a sister. And this is such a beautiful concept that I feel that we could all adopt from Muslim people living in this country, who are contributing to this country, who have become integrated into this country, have contributed so much. And basically, I wanted to end my presentation with saying that this project was incredibly enlightening, not just for exploring complex issues that affect all Americans, such as geopolitics, but it was a great way for me to really reflect upon my own relationship with this country, with the greater society around me. And thank you so much for listening to me today.
Thank you, Shan. This is beautiful. And I loved all the props that you sort of showed alongside your presentation. It's beautiful. Thank you. Ryer?
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as well. I am excited for the discussion portion of today's event, but I have a brief slides that I can talk about as well as we go into today. Thank you, everybody. My name is Ryer, and my presentation, or my Keck research, is on the analysis of freshwater hydraulic engineering development and the impact through ancient history. To briefly get started on that, I'd just like to kind of briefly just share transportation and the use of fresh water has been a critical component to the foundation of civilizations and societies throughout history. And so the natural and manufactured flow of fresh water has led to the engineering of numerous hydraulic tools that have impacted the structure of power, cultural achievement, and civilizations globally. This research project that I did focuses and analyzes how freshwater hydraulic engineering has scaled since ancient history and the impact that freshwater storage, transportation equipment, and accessories have had on society. And so really, I was excited to do this research. Although I'm an engineering student, I really wanted to combine my appreciation for history, especially ancient history, and my upbringing in California and my understanding of water and droughts, and kind of combine it together with engineering to understand hydraulic engineering from a historical perspective. And so that's kind of where my research really began from. And so to move forward, I have a little timeline here that I put together, and this helped me visualize freshwater storage and hydraulic and aquatic engineering through ancient history in the Neolithic period, most specifically, that I helped visualize for me, and I think helps visualize for a lot of other people. So roughly, 10,000 to 9,500 BC, the Neolithic revolution occurs, in which ancient humans begin to progress from hunter-gatherers to farming societies. And this is really, anything before this, there's really no water management or hydraulic engineering known of, and really at all existed. And especially early on in the early days, even to 9,000 BC, when the first well is dug in Cyprus, there is still very little hydraulic engineering taking place. It's not really until we move on, until a couple thousand years forward, that it becomes more practical and more common. But I was really fascinated to learn about how these structures and these tools were still being developed up to 9,000 years ago, and the impact that this had on really propelling society and cultures forward. And expansion really grew at an increasingly growing rate, roughly at the same time as these water and hydraulic engineering tools. And I think there's a strong relation and correlation there that I think is very important to note. And then roughly going into 7,500 years ago, the first cistern and barrage dam is built in the Jafar Basin to store and control water, which is really leading to the agricultural impacts of the hydraulic tools. And really, there's not many advanced high-tech tools in ancient history, but it's mostly the simple stuff, storing water in a big area just out in the open, using a dam to prevent flood management. It's the little things that really were just used a dirt and a shovel, but that led to the growth of civilizations at a really increasing rate. Going into 4000 BC, the first canal is excavated used in the Indus Valley for crop irrigation. Again, a lot of agricultural impacts here. 3600 BC, the Bronze Age begins, and the Sumerian civilization emerges due to the increase in irrigation. And then this is a fun little one I wanted to throw in. There's very little significance, but 1800 years ago, 1800 BC, the makeshift flushing toilet on the Aegean island of Knossos was discovered. And it's really just kind of fascinating that, flush toilets were not, used practically until recently, a couple hundred years ago. But really the first one that really had flushing water was 1800 BC. And it's fascinating that they had the technology and the ability to establish something like this. And they really utilized the innovation to the full extreme, which I love to read about. Moving forward here, again, this is a quick diagram, and two quick pictures that show a Neolithic, well on the left versus a current modern well on the right. And there's very little technological advancement on the left. It's just rocks lining a pit to store water. And this was later filled in, and historians don't necessarily know why. But really, it's just they did what they could with their hands and with their simple tools to store and use and manage water. But these little developments and little progressions allowed for societies to really advance. And so I'll move forward again to kind of just talk about the three big things that I've already mentioned a little bit in the agricultural aspect. As ancient settlements grew in population, there's an increased dependency on capturing, controlling runoff to allow for settlements and farming further away from rivers. And so one of the biggest aspects of this was growing and going away from rivers, and that allowed cities and populations to expand further and further. One thing is the earliest irrigation system that I noted dated back to around 5000 BC in the Chogomama site of Mesopotamia. This Ubaid settlement is the earliest account of water management in the Mesopotamia region of ancient cultures, and allowed for the foundation of the Sumerian civilization and established of a large trade economy. And so this water and hydraulic engineering also had an impact on the trade society of the ancient civilizations. And so there's really a big grasp and a big reach into lots of different areas. Additionally, the Nabateans from later on that I didn't necessarily cover too much in my Neolithic period in discovery and research, but they were from 300 BC to roughly 106 AD society, and they depended on the innovative water management in order to survive and evolve. This kingdom, the Nabateans in Petra, is responsible for the development of a 26.5 kilometer long aqueduct to provide water to the Humaya settlement. And some of the cisterns filled in this aqueduct are still in use today. And so that's why I really wanted to note the Nabateans is this society from 300 BC, they're still using this technology and water management technology, which I think is fascinating. Again, it is as simple and as little as it is, and the little tools that they had, it is still in impact and still in use today. So really water and power, the progress that I believe from an advancement of ancient settlements in hydraulic engineering is that I believe hydraulic engineering is a greater measure of cultural achievement than wealth, weapons, or other tools. Dams that were used, aqueducts, and irrigation tools allowed for civilizations to flourish in greater flood protection and greater bartering resources. With time, these water transportation and storage resources led to power and economic wealth. So really, this research was an opportunity to discover and dive deeper into how the tools that were innovative and invented from little and they grew into bigger tools allowed for civilizations to grow and really expand further with societies and with cultures. As has already been mentioned, my research is ongoing, and I still am trying to make even further connections with the expanse of the engineering and hydraulic tools. But I hope to kind of continue to grow as I finish out this semester and throughout the rest of my life, really just kind of continuing to learn more about water management and hydraulic engineering. So thank you so much for sharing, and I look forward to discussing everybody's research projects today. Thank you.
Raya, I just wanted to say it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you. I learned so much, especially from the timeline and the being able to visualize the technology. It's beautiful. Samuel.
And I'll just start off by thanking Professor Malakian for being my advisor and meeting with me and giving his expertise and advice and making this project possible. So my project is titled From Sustenance to Decadence, a literary and scientific discussion of modern lifestyles driving climate change. And so I study both interdisciplinary humanities and a hard science, biochemistry. And so I was interested in bringing these two fields together to look at climate change, which is a pressing issue in our time. And so today our lives are more intertwined with technology and material wealth than ever before in history. So just to poll the audience here, could you please raise your hand if you own both a smartphone and a computer? Okay, we see a lot of hands going up. So at the click of a button, you can buy anything from a toothbrush to a surfboard on Amazon, and you can have it delivered right to your doorstep. A 2019 Nielsen report shows the average American spends over 11 hours daily on media, whether that's radio, television, on your smartphone, on apps and social media, or on the internet, at work. And these increasingly technological lifestyles are accompanied by an alienation from nature. They provide more avenues for advertisers and messages from society to inundate our lives. And they're also driving what may be the greatest existential threat to humanity, anthropogenic climate change. So today we'll discuss Henry David Thoreau's concepts of necessity and the common mode of living. And then we'll take a look at how news media ownership and the propaganda model from Noam Chomsky and Ed Herman shows how news media can forge consumerism in our common mode of living today. Third, we'll introduce the science of anthropogenic climate change. And finally, we will look at how some literature shows reconnecting with nature can alter our worldview to care for the environment. And so here, first, as many of you know, Henry David Thoreau went into the woods in Massachusetts in 1845, and he built a small cabin near Walden Pond where he lived for 2 years. One of his many ideas is that of a common mode of living. He thinks the conventions of society are uncritically accepted as correct and they're adhered to. He writes, "It appears as if men had deliberately chosen the common mode of living because they preferred it to any other, but they honestly think there is no choice left." Now, his issue with the common mode is that it strays from necessity, and to him, necessary things are those which serve to keep the vital heat within us or keep us alive, like food, shelter, clothing. And hence he criticizes the superfluous luxury of large houses, of extra fashionable clothing, of technology like the telegraph or the railroad in his time. So he writes, "A monkey at Paris puts on a traveler's cap and all the monkeys in America do the same." And so that's an example of how our lives today, right? It might be an Instagram influencer posts a picture wearing Aeropostale brand and everyone rushes to go buy the shirt. And so that's an example of how our common mode of living may stray from necessity and unreflectively accept what society purports as correct. So here's a quick video of a scientific phenomena called spontaneous synchronization, and this demonstrates the common mode of living. So here you can see metronomes, and they're all ticking, they're all discordant. And then after about a minute or so, they're all ticking in unison. And so this is analogous to the common mode, where we become subsumed into the conventions of society. And it's hard to deviate. There are these worn treads that we just tend to fall into. So that's the common mode of living. And now today, our common mode of living We fly in airplanes, we drive cars, we interact with our smartphones thousands of times each day. And the life cost of this, Thoreau is very concerned about. The life cost today, right, is the average American spends 90,000 hours at work, and mostly in their central adult years. And Thoreau writes, our lives are frittered away by detail. We have little time to be unhurried and wise. And that's similar to one of Pope Francis's ideas about the rapidification of our lives, where we have an intensified pace of work in life. So we have little time to be unhurried and wise and reflect on what it is we're doing, because we're so consumed into this common mode. And so Thoreau, instead, he goes to the woods to cast off the mud and slush of opinion and prejudice and tradition and delusion and appearance, that alluvion which covers the globe. Rather, he seeks to live deliberately and to front only the essential facts of life and conceive for himself, genuinely experience the reality. Here's a quote from Pope Francis, and he says, everything then depends on our ability to see the need for a change of heart, attitudes, and lifestyles. Otherwise, political propaganda, the media, and shores of public opinion will continue to promote an individualist and uncritical culture subservient to unregulated economic interests and societal institutions at the service of those who enjoy too much power. And so here, chapter 2 of mine discusses how news media forges a common mode of living that furthers our capitalist society and consumerism. And reflected in this quote, we see Pope Francis recognizing the media plays a role in promoting an uncritical culture. And remember, an uncritical culture is a key aspect of Thoreau's common mode of living. It's uncritically accepted as correct. And what's also interesting is the economic interests that Pope Francis writes about here. They're recognized by Thoreau, who states that the goal of corporations is profit rather than honestly making sure mankind is well clad. Liz Clark, a later author we discussed, she also notes how the corporate goal of profit, right, is the primary concern above other things. And so chapter 2 here looks at how news media is monopolized. 90% of US media is owned by about 6 major corporations in the United States. This corporate ownership and ad-based revenue make news organizations privy to uphold the status quo. And this comes about through structures within these organizations that promote certain viewpoints that tend, for the most part, not to challenge and inconvenience the agenda of news media ownership. So that was chapter 2, really looking at how news media ownership through Ed Herman and Noam Chomsky's propaganda model, how that can promote our common mode of living today, which is consumerist lifestyles in a capitalist society. And the issue with these lifestyles is this number here, 6,558 million metric tons of carbon dioxide were released in 2019 by the United States alone. And this shows anthropogenic climate change is the byproduct of our lifestyles today, which are transportation, right? Burning fossil fuels to fly around the world for vacation or drive our own cars, our electricity to power our devices and our homes, other industry, right, to produce the goods we consume, whether that's clothing or furniture to fill our houses. These behaviors are driving climate change. And this happens through the greenhouse effect, where we release greenhouse gases due to our consumption of fossil fuels. And solar radiation, which is absorbed by the Earth's surface, is re-emitted in the infrared wavelength. And this wavelength corresponds to the vibrational frequencies of atoms in these gases, which they have a specific frequency that corresponds to the infrared wavelength emitted by Earth. This, along with a changing dipole moment in these gases, or it's a changing charge, allows the gases to absorb the energy emitted by Earth, and they can either pass along to other molecules, or they can release it as heat. And when they release it as heat, it warms our atmosphere. And we can see that carbon dioxide levels up in this right graph, they correspond directly to human industrial activity since the Industrial Revolution in about 1800. So this is problematic. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts a warming by the end of the century of a few degrees Celsius. and accompanied by increasingly frequent and intense extreme weather patterns, sea level rise due to the thermal expansion of our oceans, where water, when you increase the temperature of water, it decreases the density, which means it takes up more space. Our sea levels are going to rise, inundate coastal areas. We have about 40% of the world's population lives within 100 kilometers of the coast. So a lot of our economies and infrastructure will be affected. And then ocean acidification, these increasing CO2 levels we just looked at, they've already led to a 26% increase in acidity since the Industrial Revolution. And this threatens our ocean ecosystems, the phytoplankton, which produce oxygen for the atmosphere, and fisheries. And it's important to note that the poor and low-lying countries will be disproportionately affected by climate change, and they're not the ones most responsible. It's the United States. We emit 20 tons of carbon per capita in the US, and many of these poor countries emit between 0.1 to 1 ton of carbon. So they're the ones who are going to suffer most, whereas the developed countries like the United States are most responsible. And so now, after we looked at how anthropogenic climate change is an effect of our modern lifestyles, chapter 4 shows that some literature, such as Thoreau and some contemporary literature, shows reconnecting with nature can profoundly impact our worldview and relationship to the environment. So Thoreau writes, "It is glorious to behold this ribbon of water sparkling in the sun, the bare face of the pond full of glee and youth, as if it spoke the joy of the fishes within it and the sand on its shore." So here Thoreau's reverence for nature is evident, and he later observes the woods and writes, "Am I not partly vegetable mold and leaves myself?" So we see he feels interconnected with and sees a beauty and value in nature after living in close proximity to it. And similarly, Liz Clark, who is a modern environmentalist and activist and writer, she sailed across the Pacific for a few years, and she notes a similar sense of interconnectedness as Thoreau. And she writes, "Looking out at all the sacredness surrounding me, I fear that if we never have these sorts of close encounters with open spaces and wild creatures, if our only contact with wilderness and animals is through a television and pets, we risk not caring whether they exist at all." And so this idea that instilling the value of nature is essential to mending our relationship is actually also reflected by Pope Francis. And he writes in his encyclical Laudato Si, "If we approach nature and the environment without this openness to awe and wonder, if we no longer speak the language of fraternity and beauty in our relationship with the world, our attitude will be that of masters, consumers, ruthless exploiters, unable to set limits on their immediate needs." And so we began today with a literary discussion of how our modern lifestyles stray from necessity and fit Thoreau's concept of a common mode of living. This is in part fueled by economic interests and the media, and this drives climate change, whereas perhaps spending time in nature can help us to see its value and mend our relationship with the environment. And thank you for listening.
So want to thank all of the presenters again. Those are really wonderful presentations. I'm sorry we couldn't see them live, but we have this instead. I think we wanted to sort of give these scholars today a chance to ask each other questions first. Maybe begin with any sort of comments, feedback, thoughts they have from listening to each other before we open up to the others here. So please just feel free to speak whenever you want.
I guess I have a question for you, Sam. I was really excited to hear about your project. I haven't heard about it since last year, so that was awesome. I really enjoyed your breakdown of Pope Francis's quote and explaining the model you're presenting before. I'm just curious as to why you use Pope Francis as a piece of literature. What drove you or inspired you to use that?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. So I first read his encyclical Laudato Si in a class about a year ago, and Pope Francis really emphasizes what was kind of the approach of my work. It's that we don't need technological, or we do need technological solutions, but the root of our environmental crisis that we face today is not going to be solved merely by technological solutions. It reflects, rather, a deeper issue with the human relationship currently to the environment. And so Pope Francis takes, right, he's of the Catholic tradition, so he takes an approach that that looks at what an appropriate interpretation of the Catholic tradition is in valuing nature and what the appropriate human relationship to nature should be. And Pope Francis, right, he's named after Saint Francis of Assisi, who was a saint that emphasized closeness between humans and the natural world, as you saw in that last picture where he has the animals around him. And so it was that idea that literature, right, whether it's Thoreau or Liz Clark, and being in proximity to nature and seeing beauty in it can inspire us to care for it and change our lifestyles that are harming the environment.
That's awesome. Love to see science and religion working together like that.
Thank you. I can ask you a question, maybe, Catherine. It was about so you mentioned that the experience of the individual as opposed to the structure of religion, right, in your discussion of spirituality. And could you talk a little bit more about how the individual conceiving reality is important to us, your idea of spirituality? Because Thoreau really, he emphasizes that individual conception of reality is important.
Yeah, I guess like I've always like struggled to like kind of put this into words, but I don't know, I went into a little bit more in my paper, but just like I really think about songs and music, and like I think about people listening to like breakup songs, and like, okay, yeah, like you can consume that and you can listen to that and it can have like mean nothing, it can be white noise to you, but you can also go through something that is like so personal, and like just like that outpour of emotion that comes when something just resonates with you, and like you feel so in awe that someone else could like feel the exact same thing as you, but it's such an individual experience while also being like a collective experience. And that's just honestly what I view spirituality as, is like growing as an individual, but in the presence and with the push of a collective, if you understand what I'm saying.
And do you think a spirituality can exist within the bounds of those structured religions as well? Or is this something distinct that is characterized by being outside of those doctrines and boundaries of a organized structure?
No, I did read a lot about Christian spirituality in my research, and like there definitely is this feeling and this essence of like the importance of the human experience. I have a problem with people like using the terms interchangeably and not understanding that they are interconnected and they do overlap, but they are distinct in their own. And I want people to explore more the depth of spirituality outside of religion. I think you definitely can use it. It is used in religion. It's a huge part of religion, but I want people to see more of like an accessible and an approachable way to engaging with spirituality without having to have like these religious backgrounds.
Catherine, for me, that individual yet shared experience of the song Runaway by Kanye West, I had to put that out there. It is powerful, and I totally see what you're saying in that. A question I could pose to really anybody, but I'll direct to Shane, and anybody else could jump in, is how has the research you did impacted the way you live your life, and you know, how has it shifted the way you're going to view the world moving forward, you know, after finishing this research and after graduating?
Well, for me, given the fact that a significant portion of my project was also really dedicated to an engagement of also spirituality and sort of internal reflection and into my own sort of personal background. I think in terms of how this research project can benefit me and my prospects in the future, and I really feel that we're living in an interesting age, and this ties back actually, this is funny, this is again the interconnectedness of all things. This actually ties back in all your presentations. We're living in a really interesting age where, although we are more digitally connected with than ever, we are still also simultaneously more misinformed, uninformed, and lonelier than ever. There's actually a really sort of strange paradox, especially in the Western industrialized world. I really feel that, the internet, like Sam was mentioning, it's at the end of the day, technology is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad purposes. And I think when it comes to technology, when it comes to how we view each other, I really think that we need to sort of advance our hearts and advance our minds as fast as the relentless onslaught of technology, I really feel. And I feel that in a way, my project personally, my project was incredibly grounding and humbling because it really made me reflect on how we can actually really provide inspiration and answers from other people, from other viewpoints, from other ways of life. And in fact, a really interesting idea that's really similar to what I researched on Ummah is an idea that's in Africa. It's called, I may be saying it wrong, but I believe it's called Ubuntu. But it's basically a belief, it's an idea that was spoken a lot by Nelson Mandela in the anti-apartheid movement, where you basically view people as, you view everybody has the potential of being your brother or sister. So the violence that you do to other people, you are potentially, that's your brother and sister, but then also the compassion that you give to other people, it's also as if you were helping your own brother or sister. And I guess, we live in an age, there's a lot of political divisions, there's a lot of misunderstanding. And I guess my project helped me really sort of break through the dehumanization and humanize how we can humanize ourselves and our relationship with other people. I have a question for you. I really found your historical, being a passionate lover of history myself, I found your research really fascinating. Like Dr. Foucan said, the timeline was really, really helpful. I was wondering if you've ever done really any research into in what is now India and Pakistan and Afghanistan, like the Indus Valley civilization. I heard they were very sort of groundbreaking in their sort of early research of like aqueducts and sort of like clean water. And so have you done any research about them?
I didn't expand too far geographically. And so no, I did not quite get to that. I focused a lot more Mesopotamia and also in the Mediterranean with kind of like the region of Greece as well. But that is something that I do want to hope to look into, especially going also into China as well, as some of the books that I were reading were mentioning different parts of the world that I just didn't have the time to scope onto with my project. But it is something that I am interested in looking into more in the future.
Yeah, because I was thinking, I was really, I love the way you spoke about sort of situating yourself in this project, like as growing up in a drought state, what is my relationship to water? And also your linking of water, transportation, and water technology, I think you said, with achievement in ancient civilizations. So I was wondering if you think it's the same today. Do you think that we judge each other by who has the better toilets? Or I'm actually asking a very serious question, like sort of, and I don't mean just running water, I mean in sanitation. Because the reason I'm asking is because I attended a town hall about how San Diego wants to have drinking water in the potty, as being sort of, this is what we want to give you with your tax dollars. And I was just sort of like, is that, so do you think that sort of running fresh water, especially in terms of access in household sewage, do you think we still see that as a marker of civilized progress, if that makes any sense?
Yes, I definitely hear what you're saying, and I would argue yes. Something that I didn't get the chance to explore in depth in my research, but was definitely present in the later part of the ancient history, was water decorations, and specifically fountains, and a lot so in ancient Greece. And I think, how people use water in extravagant ways has only progressed, especially with, flushing toilets and other hydraulic engineering aspects. And just in terms of looking at, our current society, I would say that it is a judgment factor of how people look at other people and in the fountain or the toilets or the things that they have, and especially access to fresh water in a toilet or anywhere within their home would be an avenue for society to judge one another. But even further so, in not just a decorative fashion, but how other hydraulic engineering tools are used, especially now. So it was not prevalent in ancient cultures, but power generation and hydroelectric power from dams, and how some cultures or some societies and countries have more access to hydraulic power than others. And so I think it's a mix and a balance of advancements in hydraulic engineering to generate power and also access to generate enjoyment. And amusement parks, for example, another facet of that, and water rides and everything along those lines. And so I think it's definitely a way that people have used to, and societies have used to create indifferences and in inequalities. And there is an opportunity for a more equal displacement of access to water enjoyment, and all of the works. So yeah, it was prevalent, I think, in ancient societies and has only grown now.
Thank you. That was such a beautiful answer. Also, sort of thinking about what Shan is saying, that technology makes us more isolated. Of course, so much went on when you went to the water wells, right? Like a long time ago, community building. So I'm actually just a moderator, so I shouldn't be doing all the talking. Any questions from anyone else? I want to also just say that Lindy Villa joined late, but nothing would happen with any of us if she wasn't wasn't a part of the team and the group. So I want to thank you so much, Lindy, not just for organizing this, but everything else you do for us as well. So I don't know if anybody else has questions. I know there are other professors here. Jesse, Lindy, if you have questions, or the other speakers.
I have a question. Actually, I was really intrigued. Well, first of all, congratulations to all of you. These are just amazing. The main question that's going through my head right now is why, as an undergrad, I was not as brilliant as all of you. But that's a whole personal other thing. But I was really compelled, actually, Catherine, and I've never encountered your work before, but your comment at the end about how academia being disconnected, like that academics not situating themselves within their own research is actually to the detriment of both like the public private engagement, like of the academy with the public, right? And I don't know, there's probably a question buried in there somewhere, but I was just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit, because I know you only had a little bit of time, but I guess I was compelled by that, that maybe if we as academics could, again, situate ourselves a little bit better, it might help us to make some of our research more accessible.
Yeah, Dr. Foucault knows I've just been in this whole battle of like coming up with things and realizing that like my perspective and like the way that I see things all comes with like my upbringing and my education and like just where I situate in this world. And I've really been struggling with that and, trying to produce research, but also make sure that like my research is accessible, but also inform people that I come from this certain space. And I've had to do some more research into like colonial frameworks in my research. And I've also just found that like there's just such an inequality in academics where people are unable to understand the work that they're reading, and the information that they could be getting out of this could be so beneficial and useful to them, but it's just so jarring to read and difficult and like painful in some ways. And I've just found that like the works that I've really resonated in research are the ones that like give great analogies and use normal language and use everyday terms. And she talks about like Iris Yobs talks about the soul in her work, and like she's not afraid to bring it up and tell academics that they've been hesitant to like use that before. And to me that is just super inspiring. And I think I just got to a point in my college career where I felt comfortable like putting forth my own voice. And like, I'm really trying to find myself in that because I've been fighting it for so long, but it feels really good. And I think it's beneficial for both the writer and the reader because everyone just gets so much more out of it.
Thank you so much, Brad. I just put in the chat that that's what I think every year at this time. What was I doing? I wasn't doing this, that's for sure. Any other questions?
On this topic, I mean, it's kind of interesting that I know I'm just going to talk about my own work here instead of asking sort of question, but it's interesting, talking about positionality of the writer in your work is that, Henry David Thoreau, he's not an uncontroversial figure in recent times because of his positionality in that he was Harvard educated and is perceived as elitist by some. His father owned a pencil factory. He wasn't obliged to be simply living in the woods. And so that's interesting that you bring up one's positionality and to what extent it should be considered, because some might think, oh, Thoreau is a hypocrite because he doesn't know what it's like to really be poor. Whereas personally, I think it's important to recognize that positionality, but it doesn't annul one's insights altogether. Rather, it should be seen as a lens through which their work is produced. But yeah, I just wanted to comment on that.
Well, I absolutely loved the panel and wanted to thank everyone, and also, call a special attention to ask Shan, thank you for presenting. I have not encountered your work prior to this panel, so it's really exciting to learn about what you're doing. And thank you for presenting, during the holy month of Ramadan, on the importance, the often overlooked importance of the role of the Muslim communities and histories that really make the U.S. what it is, and are often disavowed through phobias, so articulately put. My question, though, because I'm not Muslim myself, and I don't really know a whole lot about the faith, but my question is about the Ummah, in your view of the how this idea of the Ummah can be powerful for, within a context that has so much Islamophobia. I just want you to say a little bit more about it, because in my understanding, part of the concept is, as a community of practitioners. So, and please correct me if I'm misunderstanding that, but, so in other words, it would be a way of sort of bringing community together who are part of the practicing, who are living kind of the right principles of Islam, together in a community, right, for a common practice. And so is that part of your view of the term Ummah, is that there are sort of like principles and practices that actually make like good community?
For me, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Community that are part of it, or do you view it as to a more range of values? Go ahead, please.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. It cutting off towards the end, but thank you very much. I would say, from the argument that I'm sort of putting forth is, I sort of interpret Ummah not only from sort of a religious perspective, but also from a cultural perspective. I really feel that that we in the West, in sort of the industrialized nations, even though we are making supreme and outstanding advances in technology in various forms of just conveniences of daily living, like Sam was saying, just we have instantaneous gratification at the click of a button within a heartbeat, even though we may have all of our basic Pavlov sort of needs of survival readily available to us, many still suffer from various forms of psychological illnesses, maybe even depression, or maybe even feelings of isolation. And basically, I argue that Ummah is a way of allowing us to connect on a more inclusive, sort of broad level, as opposed to sort of being very exclusionary, as sort of being very sort of the othering. I feel that I don't say, I don't mean Ummah as like being like specifically like, oh, this is like an Islamic community. I definitely am not arguing that. Basically what I'm saying is I'm arguing from sort of a cultural perspective, this idea that that families don't need to sort of consist of just a nuclear family, and everybody beyond that is sort of a various sort of second or third or fourth degree cousin, or even though that people may not technically be blood related, they're not family from us, they can only be family friends. I'm basically arguing that this idea that's very common in Africa, in the Middle East, in Central Asia and South Asia, this idea that families are sort of bound by a greater idea of love and spirituality, that is something that is so, I feel, necessary and so important, and something that can be embraced far beyond just the Islamic community itself. Like, I'll give you guys an example. I guess I may be talking really abstract sort of terms, but for my personal example, being the child of immigrants and being sort of raised in the US, a lot of my friends found it strange that even though I grew up with so many second or third cousins, I just called them brothers. But they thought it was weird. It's like, why do you call them brothers? They're not technically your brothers. And I would insist, from my cultural perspective, that was very strange, because in my mind, we made no such sort of categorization that differentiated them as being anything less than brothers or sisters to me. And I'm just arguing that that's something that could really sort of profoundly, I feel, positively affect communal relationships, and also in the sense that, we can include people as family even though they're not blood related to us. This is something that could just benefit us so much. So it's a complex thing, but I guess that's basically what I'm saying in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Shan. That was a very helpful explanation, and I very much appreciate what you're bringing to us today. So thank you.
I wanted to just sort of reiterate what people have been saying in the comments box and in the chat box and in the comments, which is to thank the 4 presenters today so much for their outstanding work. But as I always say, doing the work of research. I hope you'll all have realized that research is not ending in a certain place or finding a certain product. It's just a practice of inquiry. And once you start, you'll always keep doing it, no matter what you do afterwards in life. So I hope you stay curious and just enjoy thinking the way that you do at this advanced level, wherever it takes you. Thank you so much. Thank you to the guests and to my wonderful team, Lindy and Jesse.